Hi there, folks. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of new old stock, and that would be merchandise which was manufactured or intended for sale many years ago, which sat somewhere in storage for a long time until eventually it made it to the marketplace. Well, I've got some purchases here which certainly would qualify as new old stock. Recently I put in an order to one of the Canadian reloading component suppliers, and one of the things that the supplier had listed were these Herter's brand 303 British cartridge cases. So I know my buddy Scott, here on YouTube, you'll know him as the Gun Geek. He's used these cases before, and I think he had pretty good luck with them, so I bought a few boxes to try as well. And got these in, and I'm kind of impressed with how good a shape the boxes are in, considering the age of them. Now, the Herter's brand name has been sort of resurrected in recent years, I think by Cabela's, as a kind of an in-house brand name. I might have the wrong supplier on that, but anyway, one of the big hunting retailers apparently purchased the Herter's brand name. This is the original Herter's, though. This is not the new use of the brand name. Herter's was sort of the original mail-order sporting supply company store. They had a big catalog. They sold reloading components. They sold guns, I believe, before 1968. They sold fishing supplies, camping stuff, you name her. They sold it, and their advertising was noted for its excessive use of hyperbole. Anyway, a little bit of that is evident on this box. These aren't just cartridge cases. They're the world's finest quality brass cartridge cases. Micrometer precision made of finest virgin brass. Well, who doesn't like virgin brass? Each case electronically weighed. Each case electrically inspected for faults. And it says made in Sweden by Precision Craftsman. And it's got the caliber there. 20 cases and that kind of fancy looking Herter's logo. Caliber stamped on the end of the box again, both ends. Guaranteed world's finest quality. So they certainly weren't a company that was afraid to talk up their products. And on the back we've got Herter Ultra Precision International Match Grade cases. That sounds pretty fancy. Guaranteed made of the finest procurable virgin cartridge brass. There we go with the virgin again. Guaranteed made to closer tolerances and with finer workmanship than any cartridge cases made in the world. So, they weren't afraid to pump up their products. And they have a space in the box here for you to write some notes, types of loads, some various information, number of times reloaded. And there's Herter's address in Minnesota. And they tell the customs people that it's the contents are made in Sweden. So that's what the box looks like. And considering that box is probably 30, 40 years old, it's in pretty good shape. So let's have a look at the contents. The inside of the box, it's got a cardboard divider here. And here we have the contents. I've talked enough about the box, right? So here's the brass. And this was actually fairly tarnished when I got it. I think just from sitting in storage for a long time. I put it through the tumbler for quite a while to clean off some of the tarnish. But I'm not too worried about a bit of tarnish as long as it's not, anything more than just a surface tarnish. But this is pretty good looking stuff once you've got it polished up. And there's the head stamp. Herter's 303 British. Kind of an unusual primer pocket. It's got a very severe bevel to it to allow the primer to seat flush. And most people, if you go online and you look up any information about this brass, most people seem to assume that it is made by Norma, because Norma is sort of the most well-known Swedish company that manufactures ammunition and components. However, there is another company, or there was another company, which manufactured cartridge cases, and I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it because I'll probably just butcher it. I'll put it down below on the bottom of the screen here. I'm of the opinion that these cartridge cases, these Herter's cases, are probably not made by Norma. They're made by that other company that I mentioned. And here's why. Here's an actual Norma manufacturer 303 case. I'll get both of these up together. And, you know, they use a different style of head stamp. And a little bit different. The primer pocket is not radiused quite as severely. It is radius, but it's not, you know, look at how big the radius is on that one versus the Norma case. I mean, I could be wrong. They might be made by Norma, but in my opinion, they don't look kind of similar enough. The Norma case here on the right has got the undercut, which is kind of common on most types of brass today. This kind of lets the extractor get a little deeper on the case. The Herter's brand case doesn't have that undercut. And you'll notice there's a little difference in the coloration of the brass. Now, the Norma brass has the sort of typical modern type of kind of a gold look to it, much more of a yellowy color, whereas the Herter's has more of a coppery color. And by way of comparison, so there's the Herter's there. There's the Norma. I got a couple other cartridge cases here to compare to. Here's a Federal 303, and you'll notice it looks more yellow like the Norma does. Then we've got this other cartridge case here which matches a little bit more closely the coloration of the Herter's brass. And this is a World War II Canadian-made case, 1944 DI, or Defense Industries. And these have a higher content of copper, and as a result, less zinc, more copper. It tends to leave the cartridge brass with this more of a reddish copper color, whereas the more modern style of brass has a high content of zinc and a lot less copper. It leaves you with this much more yellowy, shiny case. So I think because the company that I believe made these Herter's cases, they actually, I believe, were into copper processing. They may have even had a copper mine. So I think this is probably not Norma brass. And the fact that it's got a higher copper content is probably a good thing, because I know these Canadian-made World War II cases, they have a really good lifespan. They reload quite well. They're very ductile type of case. Anyway, so basically I think these Herter's cases are made to basically an old type 303 military spec. And something else that I checked into before I started reloading these cases was the weight of the cases. Now these Herter's cases, I weighed 10 of them, and I come up with an average weight of 178.1 grains. Now by way of comparison, a Privy Partisan case, which is kind of a military spec case as well, they weigh in, an average for 10 of those was 176.2 grains, whereas a commercial case, in this case a Remington UMC case, 10 of those averaged out to a weight of 160.7. Now that's important because if you go look up some load data, you'll usually find the type of cartridge case quoted, and in my Lyman book they actually developed their load data with Remington cases. So there's a pretty significant difference in weight between the 160.7 grain Remington case that they developed their load data with, as opposed to these Herter's cases with their 178.1 grain weight. So that basically means it's a thicker case, and therefore it has a bit more, a bit less internal volume, and an equivalent powder charge therefore will probably give higher pressure in these heavy cases than it would in a thinner commercial case. I'm going to go grab a couple of fired cartridge cases, and I'll just show you what they look like after they've been used. Alright, here is a fired cartridge case, and this was fired in my Ross sporting rifle. And the Ross has got a very tight chamber. You'll notice there is no discernible swelling here in this portion of the brass. In most Lee Enfields you would see a big bulge right about here, but there's a very slight line here. The solid case head is this portion back here, and where the case is has its internal volume, you'll see that little line there. On most Lee Enfields you'll see a big bulge because the chambers are so large, but the Ross rifle is made with a very tight chamber, and as a result the cartridge cases come out looking pretty much the way they did before they went back into the gun. In fact, my Ross has such a tight chamber that it's almost impossible to reuse brass that was fired in Lee Enfield. Most die sets won't reduce it quite enough to let it fit in the Ross rifle chamber. And the Ross was one of the reasons why I purchased this brass, because this way I know I've got a bunch of brass that is brand new, unfired, and therefore I shouldn't have any problems with it chambering in the Ross. And if I neck size it only, like I will do, it should last almost indefinitely. Now this is, you can see there's a little bit of tarnish here on the cases. Like I mentioned, when I got these cases they had a bit of a layer of tarnish because they were sitting in storage for probably 40 odd years. And that big bevel around the primer pocket is really evident with a fire primer in here. And this was a fairly stiff load that was fired in this. This was a 174 grain Hornady round nose bullet with almost a maximum charge of Reloader 15 behind it, which is also a Swedish product, I believe. Okay, well, for what it's worth, there's my little stash of brand new 40-year-old Herter's brass. I may have to pick up some more of that the next time I place an order with the supplier. It's always good to have some good solid 303 brass for reloading, and I'm sure my Ross rifle will thank me for it. Talk to you later, guys.